This story is titled, Someone Close to Me Planted Fake Academic Work That Got Me Expelled from University. And only months later I discovered who betrayed me. Now everyone wants forgiveness, but it's too late. Sup Reddit. My name is Tyler, and I'm 26 years old. What I'm about to share happened a few years ago, but I really need to get this off my chest. I was falsely accused of something horrible simply because I refused to cross a line that should never be crossed. That wasn't even the worst part of what happened to me. My own parents didn't believe me when I told them the truth. My girlfriend of 6 years blocked me on every platform imaginable and sided with her sister without even giving me a chance to explain my side of the story. I lost absolutely everything in my life. But 10 months later, the truth finally came out in a way that no one saw coming. Here's exactly what went down, and how I managed to prove my innocence when everything seemed hopeless. I first met my ex-girlfriend Lisa when I was 19 and she was 18. We were both sophomores in high school at the time, and we started out as lab partners in our biology class. What began as a simple academic partnership turned into something much more meaningful, and we ended up dating just 4 months after we first met. By the time we graduated from high school, we had become that couple that everyone automatically assumed would get married someday. We spent 6 incredible years together, and during that entire time, I never once thought about being with anyone else. Our relationship was solid, committed, and built on what I thought was unshakable trust. Our families meshed together perfectly, which made our relationship even stronger. Her father, Robert, was the quintessential mechanical type who was always rebuilding engines in his garage and teaching me things about cars that my own dad never could. I'll never forget the first time he showed me how to rebuild a transmission on his beloved 1969 Mustang. We spent an entire Saturday working on that car together, and by the end of it, I knew more about automotive mechanics than I had learned in my first 18 years of life from my father. Her mother, Patricia, treated me like I was another son in their family. She was always making sure I took home leftovers after dinner, and she would call to check on me during particularly stressful exam weeks at school. My parents showed Lisa the exact same level of care and acceptance. My mom would take her shopping for clothes and accessories, and my dad even helped her pick out her first car, a reliable used Toyota Corolla with low mileage that he managed to negotiate down by $2,000 from the original asking price. Over the years, we developed holiday traditions, favorite vacation spots, and countless inside jokes, all the meaningful stuff that comes naturally from being together through those crucial formative years of your life. We would spend every Thanksgiving with my family, and Christmas Eve was always reserved for her family's celebrations. Every summer, both of our families would rent cabins at Lake Harrison for a week-long vacation together. By our junior year of high school, Lisa had her own designated seat at our family dinner table, and I had earned the same privilege at hers. When it came time for college, we both ended up at Central University, which was about 3 hours away from our hometown. It wasn't something we had planned that way initially. She had actually been seriously considering Atlantic University, which was about 6 hours south of where we lived. However, when I received a partial scholarship to Central for graphic design, and she got accepted into their education program, which was ranked second in the country, it just made perfect sense for both of us to go there. We made the decision not to live together in the dorms, which was probably wise given our young age. She was placed in the education dormitory with other students in her program, while I was housed in the technology building with fellow design and computer science students. Even though we lived in different buildings, we saw each other every single day. We had developed the same friend group, studied at the same coffee shops around campus, and spent countless hours planning our future together. Our lives had become completely intertwined in every meaningful way. Her younger sister, Jessica, had always been on the periphery of our relationship, existing as a background presence that we didn't think much about initially. She was 4 years younger than Lisa and me, which meant she was just entering high school when Lisa and I were preparing to head off to college. At first, Jessica was simply the stereotypical annoying little sister that you'd expect in any family dynamic. She was constantly wanting to tag along with us wherever we went, and she had this habit of interrupting our movie nights at the most inconvenient moments. She would accidentally walk in on us when we were making out on the couch, and during family dinners, she would pepper us with a million questions about what college life was really like. It was all completely standard little sister behavior that didn't raise any red flags at the time. However, something began to change dramatically when Jessica hit about 17 years old. The shift in her behavior was subtle at first, but it was definitely noticeable once you started paying attention to the patterns. The first time I really noticed something was off was during one of Lisa's family barbecues during the summer after our freshman year of college. Jessica kept finding excuses to brush against me whenever she walked by, and she would ask me to help her retrieve items from high shelves even though her father Robert was significantly taller than me and was standing right there in the same room. She started wearing these incredibly short shorts and would bend over directly in front of me to look for something in the cooler, making sure I had a clear view of what she was doing. At first, I didn't think much of any of this behavior. I figured it was just typical teenage awkwardness and that she would grow out of it naturally as she matured. But then the situation began to escalate in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Jessica started texting me directly on my personal phone, and while the messages began innocently enough, they quickly shifted into more problematic territory. She would start by asking simple questions about homework assignments or wondering what Lisa might want for her upcoming birthday. But gradually, her texts evolved into much more personal territory. She would complain about how her current boyfriend didn't understand her at all, how guys her age were frustratingly immature, and how she wished she could find someone exactly like me who would treat her properly. I made the decision to show Lisa some of these concerning text messages because I wanted to be completely transparent about what was happening and get her perspective on how to handle the situation. When I showed her the messages, Lisa just laughed the whole thing off as if it was no big deal. "She's always had a little crush on you," she told me with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It's completely harmless and she'll get over it eventually." But the situation definitely didn't feel harmless when Jessica started showing up uninvited to college parties that she was clearly too young to be attending, simply because she knew I would be there. It didn't feel harmless when she began accidentally walking in on me when I was changing clothes at their family house. And it certainly didn't feel harmless when she started wearing increasingly revealing and inappropriate clothing specifically when she knew I would be around. I began actively avoiding their house whenever I knew Jessica would be home alone, and I started making polite excuses to skip certain family events where I knew she would be present and potentially cause problems. Lisa definitely noticed my changed behavior, and we ended up fighting about it several times over the course of a few months. "You're being really weird about my sister," she would say to me with frustration in her voice. "She's just a kid who doesn't know any better." But the problem was that Jessica wasn't just a kid anymore, and her behavior was becoming increasingly bold and inappropriate despite my obvious discomfort and attempts to maintain appropriate boundaries. The incident that would completely destroy my life happened in November of our junior year of college. At that point in time, everything in my life was going exceptionally well. I was maintaining a 3.9 GPA in my graphic design program, which was no small feat given the competitive nature of the coursework. I had also landed a part-time job at a prestigious marketing agency that was actively grooming me for a full-time position after graduation. The company was paying me an impressive $25 an hour to create promotional materials and marketing content, which was almost unheard of for an undergraduate intern in our area. My boss had already hinted strongly at offering me a starting salary of $78,000 immediately after graduation, complete with comprehensive health benefits and generous vacation time. I was even secretly saving money for an engagement ring, planning to propose to Lisa after we graduated the following year. I had managed to stash away about $5,200 in a separate bank account that Lisa didn't know about, carefully setting aside money from my job and various side projects. My entire future seemed mapped out perfectly, and I couldn't have been happier with how everything was progressing. Lisa was equally successful in her academic pursuits. She was studying elementary education and had been selected to attend a weekend teaching conference in Atlanta, which was a huge honor for any undergraduate student. Only 6 students from Central University were chosen to attend this prestigious conference, and Lisa had been preparing intensively for weeks leading up to the event. The conference was a golden opportunity for her to make valuable contacts with principals and district administrators who could potentially help her land an excellent teaching position after graduation. We had spent many evenings discussing our plans to settle down in the Westfield School District, where starting teacher salaries were an attractive $54,000 per year, and housing costs were still reasonable for young professionals like ourselves. I had no intention of going to Lisa's parents' house that particular weekend, since she would be away at her conference and I figured I'd just focus on my own schoolwork and projects. However, Robert called me on Friday afternoon with a request for help. He explained that his back was acting up again, and he had bought some heavy-duty steel shelving units from Home Depot that he needed help installing in his garage. These weren't lightweight shelves either. They were industrial-grade units rated to hold 2,000 pounds per shelf, which meant they required 2 people to safely mount to the garage walls. I had always maintained an excellent relationship with Robert over the years, and he had taught me so much about mechanical work and home improvement projects. So naturally, I didn't hesitate for even a second when he asked for my assistance. I headed over to their house around 7 p.m. that Friday evening, and we spent several productive hours carefully mounting the heavy shelving units to ensure they were perfectly level and securely fastened. We finished up the installation around 10 p.m., and Robert offered to make me a sandwich and share a beer with me before I headed back to my dorm for the night. Patricia was spending the weekend at her sister's house, so it was just Robert, Jessica, and me in the house that evening. I was already halfway to my car, keys in hand, and ready to drive back to campus when Jessica came running out the front door calling after me. "Wait!" she shouted, jogging across the front yard in her bare feet. "My laptop is acting really weird and I have this huge paper due on Tuesday morning. Can you please look at it real quick?" Robert was standing right there in the doorway and immediately chimed in. "Yeah, help her out before you go. You're always so good with that computer stuff and I wouldn't know where to begin." So I followed Jessica back inside the house, thinking this would be a simple 5-minute fix. She led me over to the kitchen table, where her laptop was set up with various textbooks and papers scattered around it. The technical issue turned out to be incredibly simple. Just a classic case of too many browser tabs open and cache data clogging up the system. All I needed to do was clear her browser cache, close the unnecessary applications, and restart the computer. The entire troubleshooting process took maybe 12 minutes at most. As I was getting up from the kitchen table to leave, Jessica suddenly moved directly into my path, positioning herself between me and the exit. "Thanks so much for fixing that," she said, standing way too close to me for comfort. "You're always so helpful with everything." I immediately took a step backward to create some appropriate distance between us. "No problem at all," I replied politely. "Tell your dad I said goodnight, and I'll see you both soon." But instead of letting me leave, Jessica stepped forward again, closing the gap I had just created. "He just went upstairs to take a shower," she said with a strange smile on her face. "So we're completely alone down here now." That's when she placed her hand directly on my chest and looked up at me with what I'm sure she thought was a seductive expression that she had probably practiced in the mirror. "Jessica, don't," I said firmly, immediately removing her hand from my chest. "This isn't appropriate at all." But she wasn't deterred by my clear rejection. Instead, she tried to justify her behavior with an argument that made my stomach turn. "Why not?" she challenged me. "I'm 19 now, so it's not like it's illegal or anything." I looked at her in disbelief, unable to comprehend how she could think age was the only issue here. "Because I'm with your sister," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "I love your sister very much." Jessica moved even closer to me, literally backing me against the kitchen counter so I had nowhere else to retreat. "She doesn't have to know anything about this," she whispered, as if she was sharing some brilliant secret plan. "I've seen how you look at me when you think nobody's watching." I was absolutely stunned by her accusation. "What are you talking about?" I responded incredulously. "I don't look at you in any way except as my girlfriend's sister. This needs to stop right now." That's when Jessica attempted to kiss me. I immediately turned my head away and pushed firmly on her shoulders to create some much-needed space between us. "Back off," I said with more authority in my voice. "This is never going to happen, ever." Her facial expression changed completely in that instant. The flirty, seductive smile that she had been wearing disappeared entirely, replaced by something cold and genuinely frightening. "You think you're too good for me?" she spat out venomously. "That I'm just some stupid kid who doesn't know what she wants?" I tried to de-escalate the situation by explaining my position clearly. "This isn't about you personally, Jessica. It's about me and Lisa, and my commitment to her." But my reasonable explanation only seemed to make her angrier. "Lisa, Lisa, Lisa," she said mockingly. "That's all anyone in this family ever talks about. Perfect Lisa, with her perfect boyfriend and her perfect future. It makes me absolutely sick to listen to." I grabbed my keys from the kitchen table, realizing that this conversation was going nowhere productive and I needed to get out of there immediately. "I'm leaving right now," I announced firmly, "and we're never going to talk about this again." As I walked toward the kitchen door, Jessica called after me with genuine venom in her voice. "You're such a jerk," she shouted. "You're going to regret this decision." I drove back to my dorm that night thinking that Jessica was probably just embarrassed about being rejected and was lashing out emotionally as a result. I even felt somewhat bad for her in a way, understanding that teenage emotions can be overwhelming and confusing. I was already planning to have a calm, mature conversation with Lisa when she returned from her conference, hoping we could figure out the best way to handle this awkward family situation going forward. I had absolutely no idea what Jessica was actually planning, or how completely my life was about to be destroyed. My roommate Kevin woke me up the next morning with an urgent tone in his voice. "Dude, your phone has been blowing up for like an hour straight," he said, shaking my shoulder. "Someone's trying really hard to reach you about something." I grabbed my phone from the charger next to my bed and felt my stomach drop immediately. There were 19 missed calls waiting for me, along with numerous text messages from Lisa, her parents, my own parents, and several mutual friends. My hands were literally shaking as I scrolled through the increasingly frantic messages. "How could you do this?" read one. "Call us immediately," demanded another. "What the hell is wrong with you?" asked a third. I called Lisa first, since her messages seemed the most urgent and emotional. She answered on the very first ring, and I could immediately tell from her voice that she had been crying heavily. "Lisa, what's going on?" I asked, though I was already starting to get a terrible feeling about what this might be regarding. "Like you don't know exactly what's happening," she responded with an ice-cold tone I had never heard from her before. "How could you do this to me, Tyler? With my own sister, in my parents' house." My blood ran completely cold when I heard those words. "Whatever Jessica told you, it's absolutely not true," I said desperately. "Nothing happened between us at all." But Lisa wasn't interested in hearing my side of the story. "She showed us everything," Lisa continued. "The text messages from you, the bruises on her wrists where you grabbed her. She told us exactly how you've been coming on to her for months, and how last night you forced yourself on her when my dad was in the shower." "That's completely insane," I protested desperately. "I fixed her laptop and left immediately. She tried to kiss me, and I turned her down. That's literally all that happened." But Lisa wasn't buying my explanation for even a second. "Stop lying to me right now," she said with a fury I had never heard in her voice before. "The text messages, Tyler. The text messages you've been sending her for months. I saw them with my own eyes." I was completely baffled by this accusation. "What the hell are you talking about? I never sent her anything inappropriate, ever." But Lisa continued her assault. "I saw them with my own eyes," she repeated. "Messages asking her to meet you alone. Telling her exactly what you want to do to her sexually. They came directly from your phone number." I felt like I was losing my mind trying to process this information. "Those messages are fake," I insisted. "She must have faked them somehow using some kind of app or website. And I suppose she faked the bruises too?" Lisa shot back sarcastically. "The ones that are clearly in the shape of fingerprints on her wrists? The bruise on her back from where you pushed her against the counter?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Yes, that's exactly what she did," I said, though I knew how crazy it sounded. "She must have given herself those bruises to make her story look believable." Lisa's voice became ice-cold in a way that chilled me to my core. "I can't believe I ever trusted you with anything. Don't call me again. Don't text me. Don't try to contact me or anyone in my family ever again. My dad is filing a police report against you right now." And with that, she hung up on me. I immediately tried calling her back, but my calls went straight to voicemail every time. I sent her a desperate text message. "Please let me explain this. This is a huge misunderstanding. I would never do anything like this to you or your family." But there was no response whatsoever. I threw on some clothes as quickly as possible and was heading toward my car to drive to her house when my phone rang again. This time it was my mother calling. "Tyler, where are you right now?" my mom asked with worry evident in her voice. "I'm going to Lisa's house to straighten this whole mess out," I replied, still hoping this could somehow be resolved through direct conversation. "No, you're absolutely not," my mother said firmly. "You're coming home to us right now." I tried to explain my innocence to her. "Mom, I didn't do anything wrong at all." But she cut me off. "Just come home immediately. We'll figure this out together as a family." I drove to my parents' house in a complete daze, my mind racing to try to understand how this situation had spiraled so completely out of control. When I arrived, both of my parents were waiting for me at the kitchen table with grim expressions on their faces. "What exactly happened last night?" my father asked without any preamble or small talk. I told them absolutely everything. About helping Robert with the shelves, fixing Jessica's laptop, her inappropriate advances toward me, and my clear rejection of her behavior. They listened to my account in complete silence. When I finished explaining, my father let out a heavy sigh. "Robert showed me the text messages, son," he said with disappointment in his voice. "They go back several months, and they're pretty graphic in nature." I felt like I was banging my head against a wall. "They're not from me," I insisted. "She must have used some kind of app to fake them and make it look like they came from my number." My father continued, "And what about the bruises? I never touched her inappropriately. She must have done that to herself to support her false story." My parents exchanged a look that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. It was a mixture of concern, doubt, and bitter disappointment all rolled into one devastating expression. "The police want to talk to you," my father said finally. "I told Robert that we'd bring you to the station ourselves so you can give your statement." The police interrogation lasted a grueling 7 hours. Detective Martinez, a man in his mid-50s with graying hair and absolutely zero patience for my explanations, showed me printed copies of text messages that were supposedly from my phone number to Jessica's. These were sexually explicit messages that allegedly went back 6 months, along with photos that I had never seen before in my life. The images appeared to be edited to make it look like Jessica and I were together in various compromising situations. "These aren't mine," I kept repeating over and over again. "I swear on my life that I never sent these messages. I never took these pictures. I don't know how they were created, but they're completely fabricated." But the detectives didn't believe a single word I was saying. Detective Martinez kept hammering away at the same points throughout the entire interrogation. "Why would she make up something like this?" he would ask. "How did these messages come from your specific phone number if you didn't send them? And most frustratingly, why did you go to the house that night when you knew she would be there alone?" I tried repeatedly to explain that her father, Robert, had specifically called me for help with the shelving project, and that I had been actively avoiding Jessica for months precisely because of her inappropriate behavior toward me. But Martinez just scribbled notes and exchanged knowing looks with the female officer who was also present in the room. By the end of that horrible day, I was formally charged with multiple serious crimes. The charges included sexual assault of a minor, since Jessica had just turned 19, but some of the fabricated text messages were dated before her birthday. They also added charges of electronic solicitation of a minor and sexual harassment. My parents were forced to post $60,000 in bail money to get me released. The conditions of my bail were absolutely humiliating. I was prohibited from having any contact whatsoever with Jessica or anyone in the Clark family. I had to surrender my passport, wear an ankle monitor at all times, and observe a strict curfew every single day. I was allowed to go home with my parents, but this was just the very beginning of my nightmare. Central University didn't wait for any kind of conviction or due process before taking action against me. They suspended me immediately pending a disciplinary hearing that was scheduled for November 15th. But this hearing was nothing more than a complete formality. The outcome had already been predetermined before I even walked into the room. Dr. Williams, who served as the head of the disciplinary committee, had already made several public statements about protecting students and maintaining a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of sexual misconduct. I was officially expelled from the university the following week, and all of my scholarships were permanently revoked without any possibility of appeal. The marketing agency where I had been working fired me on the exact same day they heard about the criminal charges against me. My boss, Jennifer, who had been mentoring me personally for over a year and had become something of a professional role model, didn't even have the courtesy to call me personally to deliver the news. Instead, the Human Resources Department sent me a cold, impersonal email, terminating my employment effective immediately. My keycard access to the building was deactivated remotely, my company laptop was wiped clean of all data, and they sent me a prepaid shipping box with instructions to return all company property within 48 hours. The financial consequences of my situation became apparent almost immediately. My bank actually froze all of my accounts due to an ongoing investigation, which meant I couldn't even access the $5,200 that I had been carefully saving for Lisa's engagement ring. Friends that I had known since elementary school suddenly disappeared from my life overnight. People who had been texting me regularly just a few days earlier now acted like they couldn't even remember my name when they saw me in public. Social media became an absolute war zone for me. Half of my notifications consisted of death threats from strangers who had heard about my case, while the other half were just people unfriending or blocking me without explanation. Lisa had blocked me on every single platform imaginable and had even changed her phone number completely. Her friends, who had also been my friends for years, posted long, dramatic statements about standing with victims and cutting toxic people out of their lives permanently. They went through their Instagram feeds and systematically removed every photo that included me, as if I had never existed in their lives at all. My sister Nicole was literally the only person in my immediate family who believed my innocence without any hesitation or doubt. "Jessica's always been completely obsessed with you," she told me during one of our private conversations. "She's always asking me weird questions about you, trying to get me to show her your old yearbook photos from high school. It was honestly pretty creepy behavior when I think back on it now. My parents tried their best to be supportive during this impossible time, but I could clearly see the doubt lingering in their eyes every time they looked at me. They paid for my bail, hired an expensive criminal defense attorney, and allowed me to move back into my childhood bedroom. But they also established strict rules for me to follow. I wasn't allowed to leave the house after 9 p.m. under any circumstances. I couldn't have any friends over to visit. I had to share my location with them at all times through a phone app. My father started most of our conversations with phrases like, "If there's anything you're not telling us." My mother cried constantly throughout this period. While they never directly accused me of being guilty, they also didn't fully believe my version of events either. The financial impact on my family was immediate and absolutely devastating. I lost my tuition payment for that semester, which was $15,600, and there were no refunds available for expelled students under any circumstances. I also lost my housing deposit of $2,100. The cost of hiring a criminal defense lawyer drained what little savings I had in just 4 days. Mark Stevens, my attorney, required a retainer fee of $12,000 upfront, and he estimated that the total cost of my defense could easily reach $60,000 or more, depending on whether the case actually went to trial. I couldn't get a job anywhere because absolutely nobody wants to hire someone who is facing serious sexual assault charges. I tried applying for various gig work opportunities, but the ankle monitor that I was required to wear made even those options nearly impossible to pursue successfully. My parents were forced to cover all of my legal expenses, but they reminded me constantly about how much money this was costing our family. They had originally planned to use those funds to help Nicole with her college expenses the following year. Now they were seriously discussing the possibility of taking out a second mortgage on the house and cashing out their retirement funds just to pay for my defense. The social isolation was absolutely suffocating. People that I had known my entire life, teachers from high school, neighbors who had watched me grow up, family friends who had been at my birthday parties, all looked at me completely differently now. They saw me as something dangerous and damaged. In the best-case scenario, they would simply avoid making eye contact with me when we crossed paths in public. In the worst-case scenario, they would leave threatening notes on my parents' front porch or shout horrible things at me when I walked by their houses. The only people who stood by me without any question or hesitation were Kevin, my former roommate, and surprisingly, Lisa's cousin Samantha. Samantha called me about 3 weeks after everything had blown up in my life. "I don't believe any of this for even a second," she said, without any preamble. "Jessica has been jealous of Lisa for her entire life, and she's always had an obvious thing for you that was uncomfortable to watch. She makes up elaborate stories all the time to get attention." I was desperate for any information that might help my case, so I asked her, "What kind of stories are you talking about?" Samantha explained. Like when she was 16, she told everyone at school that she was dating this college sophomore who was supposedly madly in love with her. But it turned out that this guy was completely made up. She had even shown people text messages from him that she had clearly written to herself. And last year, she claimed that her math teacher was hitting on her and making inappropriate comments. But it turned out that he had just given her a failing grade on an important test, and she wanted to get him fired as revenge. It helped tremendously to have someone from Lisa's own family on my side, but unfortunately it didn't change the reality of my legal situation in any meaningful way. The prosecutor assigned to my case was aggressively pushing for maximum penalties on all charges. Mark, my attorney, was already starting to talk seriously about potential plea deals, which terrified me. "I understand that you don't want to consider this option," he said during one of our strategy planning sessions, "but I need you to fully understand what's currently on the table here. As a first-time offender, you're realistically looking at a 6 to 8 year prison sentence if you're convicted on all counts. The plea deal they're offering would reduce that to 4 years with the possibility of parole after serving just 2 years. I looked him straight in the eyes and said firmly, "I'm not pleading guilty to something I absolutely didn't do. Keep fighting this case." But even as I said those words, I could feel my resolve starting to weaken under the enormous pressure. Several months passed, and unfortunately, things only continued to get worse for me. The preliminary hearings that took place in December and January didn't go well at all. Judge Richardson, a stern woman in her 60s who had a reputation for being tough on sex crimes, seemed predisposed to believe Jessica's version of events from the very beginning. Mark kept trying repeatedly to get the text message evidence thrown out of court, arguing passionately that the messages could have been falsified using various smartphone apps or computer programs. However, without any concrete proof of digital tampering, the judge allowed all of the evidence to be admitted and considered by the court. Jessica's testimony during the February hearing was absolutely devastating to watch. She cried at all the perfect moments, maintained eye contact with the judge and jury, and managed to look vulnerable and genuinely scared throughout her entire testimony. She described in vivid detail what she claimed were months of grooming behavior on my part. According to her fabricated story, I had slowly pushed boundaries over time, made her feel special and mature, and then threatened her when she finally tried to say no to my advances. She described how I had allegedly grabbed her wrists hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises when she attempted to resist, and how I had pushed her violently against the kitchen counter when she tried to get away from me. Watching Jessica lie so convincingly was absolutely terrifying. She was such a skilled and practiced liar that for brief moments even I almost found myself believing her completely fabricated version of events. It was like watching a professional actress deliver the performance of her lifetime. Kevin testified as a character witness for me, describing our friendship and vouching for my character and integrity. However, he hadn't been present on the night in question, so his testimony could only go so far in helping my case. Samantha desperately wanted to testify about Jessica's documented history of lying and making false accusations, but her own parents threatened to cut her off financially and disown her completely if she got involved in the case in any way. My sister Nicole spoke eloquently about Jessica's weird obsession with me over the years, providing specific examples of inappropriate behavior she had witnessed. But the prosecution was skilled at painting this as nothing more than a harmless schoolgirl crush that I had supposedly exploited and manipulated for my own sexual gratification. By the 5th month of this ordeal, which was March, Mark was very strongly recommending that I seriously consider accepting a plea deal. The text message evidence is incredibly damning, he explained to me during one of our meetings. The physical evidence of bruising supports her version of events perfectly. Her testimony on the witness stand was compelling and believable to everyone in that courtroom. If we go to trial and lose, which is a very real possibility, you're looking at 6 to 10 years in prison. He leaned forward and spoke more urgently. Take the plea deal. 4 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving just 2 years. You'll still be young enough to rebuild your life when you get out. But I remained stubborn in my position. I'm not pleading guilty to something I absolutely didn't do, I told him again. Keep fighting this case no matter what it takes. However, even I was starting to lose hope that we could actually win this case. The trial was officially set to begin in August, which would be exactly 10 months after the incident that had destroyed my life. I had spent those entire 10 months living like a prisoner in my parents' house. I had no job, no school, no friends, and no realistic prospects for any kind of future. Some days, I honestly didn't even bother getting out of bed at all. The depression hit me harder than anything I had ever experienced in my life. I stopped eating regularly and sometimes went days without showering. What was the point of maintaining any kind of normal routine when my life as I knew it was completely over? Even if by some miracle I was somehow acquitted of all charges, the damage to my reputation and my future had already been done. My career trajectory had been completely derailed. My relationship with Lisa, which had represented 6 years of my life and all of my hopes for the future, was gone forever in an instant. The worst part of everything was knowing that Lisa was out there somewhere, believing that I was actually capable of doing something so horrible to her own sister. After 6 years of being together, building a life together, and planning our future together, she couldn't even give me the benefit of the doubt or a chance to explain my side of the story. She didn't even question Jessica's accusations for a single moment. In April, approximately 6 months into this nightmare, I hit absolute rock bottom emotionally. I came dangerously close to ending my own life because I couldn't see any way forward. I had the entire plan worked out in detail and was sitting on my bed staring at a bottle of pills when Kevin showed up unexpectedly at my parents' house that day. He found me in that terrible state and stayed with me for 4 straight days, barely sleeping and making sure I was okay every moment. "We're going to beat this case," he kept telling me over and over again. "Something will break eventually. The truth always comes out in the end." I didn't believe him at the time, but I went through the motions of recovery anyway. I started showering again, eating regular meals, and working with Mark to go through all the case files looking for anything that might possibly help our defense. Then in May, we finally got our first real breakthrough in the case. Mark had made the decision to hire a digital forensics expert named Brian to conduct a thorough analysis of the text messages that were being used as evidence against me. Brian was extremely expensive at $85 an hour, but he turned out to be worth every single penny we paid him. After weeks of painstaking examination, Using specialized software and techniques, he discovered significant inconsistencies in the metadata of the messages. There were timestamps that didn't align properly with standard phone carrier protocols, and formatting differences that strongly suggested the text messages had been manipulated or created artificially. "It's not definitive proof of tampering," Mark warned me, trying to manage my expectations. "But it's definitely enough to create reasonable doubt about the authenticity of this evidence in the minds of the jury." This was the first piece of genuinely good news I had received in months, and I felt a tiny spark of hope for the first time since this nightmare had begun. We immediately filed a motion to have the text message evidence reconsidered by the court. Judge Richardson granted our request, though she seemed quite reluctant to do so. The prosecutor argued vigorously that the inconsistencies Brian had found were nothing more than technical glitches that commonly occur in digital communications. She brought in the county's own IT expert, who testified that message metadata can sometimes appear irregular due to server syncing issues between different carriers or routine app updates on smartphones. But despite their explanations, this discovery had created the first real crack in their seemingly airtight case. It was a small crack, but it was something concrete we could work with. Around the same time that we were making progress with the digital evidence, a girl named Rebecca reached out to me through Kevin. She had gone to high school with Jessica and had been friends with her briefly during their sophomore year. Jessica did something very similar to my older brother, she told me when we met at a coffee shop near campus to discuss her potential testimony. They worked together at the same grocery store downtown, and she developed this intense crush on him even though he wasn't interested in her at all. Rebecca continued her explanation. She told everyone at work and around town that he had groped her inappropriately in the employee break room during one of their shifts together. She got him fired immediately, and he was lucky that there were security cameras in that area that proved he was never alone with her. I asked her if Jessica had pressed formal charges in that situation. "No, she just spread rumors and made sure everyone knew her version of the story," Rebecca replied. But it was exactly the same pattern of behavior. She became obsessed with him, he rejected her advances, and then she retaliated by trying to destroy his reputation. Rebecca agreed to testify about Jessica's documented history of making false accusations against men who rejected her. It wasn't a smoking gun that would completely exonerate me, but it was another important piece of evidence that could help establish a pattern of manipulative behavior. In June, just 2 months before my trial was scheduled to begin, Samantha called me with some potentially significant news. "Jessica's story is starting to change," she told me over the phone. "I overheard her talking to my aunt yesterday, and some of the details are different now from what she originally claimed. The timeline of events, exactly what happened in which room, specific things you supposedly said to her, it's all shifting around." Samantha continued, "I think she's getting worried about getting caught in inconsistencies when she has to testify under oath at the actual trial." Mark immediately filed for another discovery motion, formally requesting any new or updated statements that Jessica had given to law enforcement or the prosecutor's office. The prosecution team objected strongly to this request, but Judge Richardson ordered them to provide any revised testimony or statements. Sure enough, when we received the updated documentation, Jessica's story had shifted significantly from her original account. Now she claimed that I had been grooming her for over a year rather than just a few months. She said that the assault had happened in the kitchen and then continued into the living room, rather than just occurring in one location. Most importantly, she now claimed that I had threatened her multiple times after that night, which supposedly explained why she'd waited until the next day to tell anyone about the incident. "This is actually very good for our case," Mark explained to me. "Changing stories and inconsistent details make witnesses far less credible to juries. People who are telling the truth don't typically need to revise their accounts of traumatic events." But despite this positive development, we still didn't have the definitive proof we needed to completely destroy Jessica's credibility. We had no smoking gun that would immediately prove she was lying about everything. The trial date was getting closer every day, and my future still hung precariously in the balance. The summer months crawled by at an agonizingly slow pace. My ankle monitor chafed constantly in the oppressive heat, and my parents' house felt more like a prison with each passing day. The trial was officially set to begin on August 23rd, and as that date approached, my anxiety levels spiraled completely out of control. Mark was more optimistic than he had been in many months. "The text message evidence is now questionable due to the metadata inconsistencies," he explained to me. "Her story has changed multiple times, which hurts her credibility significantly. We have strong character witnesses testifying on your behalf, and we have testimony about her past pattern of making false accusations. It's definitely not a slam dunk victory, but we have a legitimate fighting chance now. About a week before the trial was scheduled to begin, I received a completely unexpected visitor at my parents' house. Lisa's father, Robert, showed up at our front door, and my dad nearly slammed it in his face before Robert begged for just 5 minutes of his time. My parents brought him to our backyard where I was sitting, trying to get some fresh air and clear my head. Robert looked absolutely terrible. He had lost weight, his hair was disheveled, and he clearly hadn't been sleeping well. He didn't sit down when my parents offered him a chair. "I need to ask you something man to man," Robert said, his voice rough and strained. "Did you touch my daughter inappropriately?" I looked him straight in the eyes without flinching and said, "No, sir. I never touched Jessica inappropriately in any way. I never sent her those text messages. I never did any of the things she's accused me of doing." Robert studied my face intently for what felt like several minutes. "There are some things about her story that aren't adding up properly," he said quietly. "Things she claims happened at times when they couldn't have actually occurred." My heart started racing with hope. "Like what specifically?" I asked. But Robert shook his head and said, "I can't discuss the details of an ongoing case, but I needed to hear your answer directly from you." He left our house without saying another word to anyone. I immediately called Mark to tell him about Robert's unexpected visit. "This could be extremely significant for our case," Mark said with excitement in his voice. "If her own father is starting to have serious doubts about her story, then a jury of strangers might have doubts too." The day before my trial was scheduled to begin, the prosecutor called Mark with a surprising new plea offer. They were now willing to reduce my sentence to just 2 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving only 12 months. The sentence would be served in a minimum security facility rather than a maximum security prison. "They're getting nervous about their case," Mark explained to me. "They know that their evidence has significant weaknesses now, and they're worried about what might happen if this goes to a jury trial." Despite the relatively lenient terms of this final offer, I turned it down without hesitation. After coming this far and fighting for so long, I was determined to see this case through to the very end. Either I would be completely exonerated of all charges, or I would go down fighting for my innocence. The night before the trial began, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat on my parents' back porch until dawn, watching the stars slowly fade as the sun came up and thinking about how dramatically different my life should have been at this point. I should have been heading into my senior year of college, making plans for graduation and looking forward to starting my career. I should have been planning a proposal to Lisa and thinking about our future together as a married couple. Instead, I was fighting to stay out of prison for something I absolutely didn't do, and preparing to face whatever outcome awaited me in that courtroom. When the sun finally came up, I took a long shower, put on the professional suit that Mark had bought for me to wear during the trial, and prepared myself mentally to face whatever was coming next. The courthouse was completely packed with people when we arrived. Local media outlets had picked up my story, since it involved a college student accused of assaulting his girlfriend's younger sister. Exactly the kind of dramatic story that people love to follow when it's not happening to them personally. I saw Lisa for the first time in 10 long months as we entered the courtroom. She was sitting with her mother Patricia in the gallery directly behind the prosecutor's table. She didn't look at me even once during the entire proceeding. She had lost a noticeable amount of weight since I had last seen her, and her cheekbones were much more prominent than I remembered. She kept nervously twisting a tissue in her hands throughout the proceedings. Jessica was also present in the courtroom, dressed very conservatively with her hair pulled back in a simple style. She looked young, innocent, and vulnerable, exactly like the perfect victim that she was pretending to be. Looking at her sitting there, my stomach churned with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She didn't look like someone who was carrying the enormous weight of maintaining such a massive and life-destroying lie. The trial officially began with opening statements from both sides. The prosecutor painted me as a sexual predator who had used my long-term relationship with Lisa to gain access to her vulnerable younger sister. According to their narrative, I had groomed Jessica over an extended period of time and then assaulted her when she finally tried to reject my advances. Mark countered with our defense theory, that this was the story of a jealous younger sister who had manufactured evidence and false accusations after being rejected by someone she had been obsessing over for years. The prosecution presented their evidence first, just as is standard in criminal trials. They showed the jury the fabricated text messages, photographs of Jessica's self-inflicted bruises, and medical reports that confirmed the injuries were consistent with her fabricated version of events. Jessica gave her tearful testimony, which she had clearly rehearsed extensively in preparation for this moment. She did stumble a few times when Mark pressed her during cross-examination about the inconsistencies and changes in her story over time, but she quickly recovered by claiming that she had been traumatized and confused about some of the details initially. During his cross-examination of Jessica, Mark focused heavily on the changing timeline of her allegations. In your initial statement to police, you said that the assault occurred at approximately 10:30 p.m. Is that correct? He asked her. Yes, around that time, Jessica replied. But in your revised statement from June, you said it started at 10:45 p.m. and continued until after 11 p.m. Which version is accurate? Mark continued. Jessica had a ready answer. I told you that I was traumatized by what happened. I wasn't looking at a clock during the assault. Mark pressed further. And in your first statement, you said that the incident occurred only in the kitchen. But later you added the living room to your account. Why did you change that detail? Once again, Jessica had a practiced response. I was trying to forget parts of what happened to me, but in therapy, I've been working on facing the whole truth. She seemed to have a believable explanation for every inconsistency in her story. Our turn to present our defense came on the third day of the trial. Mark methodically worked to dismantle the prosecution's case, piece by piece. He presented Brian's digital forensics report, which highlighted all of the metadata inconsistencies in the text messages that suggested they had been artificially created or manipulated. He called Rebecca to the witness stand, and she testified about Jessica's previous false accusation against her brother that had cost him his job. He also called Kevin and several other character witnesses who spoke about my relationship with Lisa, my general behavior around women, and my overall character and integrity. Rebecca's brother Daniel actually flew in from Nevada specifically to testify in my defense. He described in vivid detail how Jessica had aggressively pursued him at their workplace, how he had clearly rejected her advances, and how she had retaliated with false accusations that cost him his livelihood. If there hadn't been security cameras in that break room to prove my innocence, he testified, I honestly don't know what would have happened to me. His testimony was powerful because it showed that this was not an isolated incident. Jessica had a documented pattern of this exact type of behavior. On the fourth day of the trial, during what was supposed to be a brief recess, Mark received an urgent phone call. I watched his facial expression change dramatically as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. We need to get back to the courtroom immediately, he said, already gathering his papers and files. Something major has just developed. When court resumed after the recess, Mark requested permission from Judge Richardson to introduce new evidence that had just come to light. The judge asked about the nature of this evidence. Security camera footage, Your Honor, Mark announced, from the Clark residence on the night in question. The prosecutor immediately objected with obvious panic in his voice. This is the first we're hearing of any security camera footage, Your Honor. This is clearly an attempt to ambush the prosecution with evidence that should have been disclosed during discovery. Mark responded calmly. Your Honor, we only just received this evidence ourselves within the last hour. Mr. Clark installed a Ring doorbell camera in his garage last year due to a series of break-ins in their neighborhood. The camera has a clear view of the kitchen door where the defendant allegedly exited after the assault. Mr. Clark only recently realized that this camera would have captured the defendant leaving on the night in question. Judge Richardson allowed the security camera footage to be admitted as evidence over the prosecutor's continued and increasingly desperate objections. Robert was called to the witness stand to authenticate the footage and explain how it had been obtained. Throughout his testimony, he wouldn't look directly at me or at Jessica, keeping his eyes focused either on the judge or on his hands. Mr. Clark, why are you just now coming forward with this evidence? Judge Richardson asked him directly. Robert cleared his throat nervously before responding. I didn't think about the camera initially when all of this happened. It automatically uploads footage to cloud storage that I rarely check or review. But certain inconsistencies in my younger daughter's account of events made me go back and look through the saved footage. The footage was then played for the entire courtroom to see. The video quality was crystal clear, and it definitively showed me leaving through the kitchen door at exactly 10:47 p.m. More importantly, it showed Jessica following me to the door, and she was visibly angry but completely unharmed. There were no bruises visible on her wrists, no tears in her eyes, and absolutely no signs of physical or emotional distress. The timestamp on the video matched exactly with the time when Jessica claimed I had been in the middle of assaulting her. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. Judge Richardson had to call for order multiple times. Jessica burst into tears at the defense table, though whether they were tears of guilt or panic, I couldn't tell. The prosecutor immediately asked for a recess to confer with his witnesses and reassess their case strategy. Judge Richardson denied this request and instructed him to continue with his cross-examination of Robert. "Mr. Clark, is it possible that this footage has been altered or tampered with in any way?" the prosecutor asked desperately, grasping for any possible explanation. "Absolutely not," Robert replied firmly. "The footage is uploaded directly to Ring's secure cloud servers using encrypted protocols. I accessed it using my personal account, downloaded it exactly as it was recorded, and provided it to the defense team without any modifications whatsoever." The prosecutor tried several more angles of attack, but the damage to their case was absolutely devastating. The video evidence completely contradicted Jessica's sworn testimony about what had happened that night and when it had occurred. When court resumed the following day, the prosecutor made a stunning announcement that nobody in the courtroom saw coming. He stood up and declared that the state was dropping all charges against me immediately. Just like that, after 10 months of pure hell, it was finally over. However, the dismissal of all criminal charges didn't magically undo the 10 months of absolute nightmare that I had endured. It didn't erase the extensive damage to my reputation, my education, my career prospects, or my personal relationships. It didn't give me back the life that I should have been living during what should have been some of the best years of my young adulthood. Jessica finally faced some real consequences for her actions, though they were nowhere near sufficient given the magnitude of what she had put me through. She was formally charged with filing a false police report, falsifying evidence, and committing perjury during her sworn testimony. However, being 19 years old and having the benefit of her father's testimony on her behalf during sentencing, she received what I consider to be an incredibly lenient punishment. She got a suspended sentence which meant no actual jail time. Instead, she was sentenced to probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and community service. The financial restitution that the court ordered her to pay me was a measly $9,200, which was absolutely nothing compared to what this ordeal had cost me financially, let alone the emotional and psychological damage she had caused. Robert and Patricia's marriage couldn't survive the aftermath of this situation. They divorced shortly after the trial concluded. Robert couldn't forgive Patricia for pressuring him to support Jessica's lies and false accusations, even after he had started having serious doubts about the truthfulness of her story. Robert reached out to me personally about a month after the trial ended to offer his sincere apology. He told me that he should have questioned Jessica's story much sooner, and that he should have checked the security camera footage weeks or even months earlier. While I appreciated his gesture and his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes, it felt like too little, too late. The damage had already been done. Lisa tried desperately to contact me repeatedly after all the charges were dropped and my innocence was proven. She sent me countless text messages, made numerous phone calls, sent long emails, and even tried reaching out through our mutual friends who were willing to serve as intermediaries. In all of her communications, she said that she was deeply sorry for not believing me from the very beginning. She apologized for not giving me a chance to explain my side of the story when Jessica first made her accusations. She told me that she missed me terribly and wanted to try to rebuild our relationship and start over together. Despite her persistent efforts, I blocked her phone number, her email address, and all of her social media accounts. After 6 years of being together, building a life together, and planning our future as a married couple, she had believed the absolute worst about me without even a moment's hesitation. Some betrayals cut so deep that you simply can't come back from them, no matter how much you might want to or how much history you share with someone. My relationship with my own parents also required some serious repair work. They wanted to reconcile and kept telling me how sorry they were for doubting my innocence during those terrible months. But I couldn't simply forget the looks of suspicion and doubt that I had seen on their faces throughout the ordeal. I couldn't forget their constant questioning and the unspoken suspicion that had hung over every conversation we'd had. I keep them at arm's length now. I call them on major holidays, visit occasionally for family gatherings, but there's a distance between us that wasn't there before this all happened. The university refused to readmit me, stating that my expulsion would stand regardless of the outcome of the criminal case. Their position was that the disciplinary proceedings and the criminal proceedings were completely separate matters, and that my expulsion had been based on their own internal investigation and standards. I filed a comprehensive lawsuit against them for wrongful expulsion and discrimination. The case is still working its way through the court system 4 years later, moving at the typical glacial pace of civil litigation. My lawyer believes that we'll eventually reach a settlement for around $250,000, which sounds like a substantial amount but doesn't even come close to covering what I actually lost. The settlement won't account for lost tuition and scholarships, but also future earnings potential, career advancement opportunities, and professional networking connections that I'll never be able to recover. Rebuilding my life from scratch was honestly the hardest part of this entire ordeal. I made the difficult decision to move 3 states away from everything and everyone I had known, determined to start completely over at a different university where nobody would know my story or my past. The financial burden was enormous since all of my previous scholarships were permanently gone. I had to take out massive student loans just to afford tuition, and the debt accumulated quickly. I worked grueling night shifts at a warehouse to pay rent on a tiny studio apartment that was barely big enough for a bed and a small desk. The job paid $16.20 an hour with absolutely no benefits, and I spent my nights from midnight to 8 a.m. loading heavy boxes and freight. Then I would try desperately to stay awake through my classes during the day, surviving on energy drinks and sheer determination. Kevin proved to be a true friend during this incredibly difficult period. About a year after I moved away, he made the decision to relocate and join me. He got a job at the same warehouse where I was working while he finished his degree through online courses. Having someone around who knew me before this nightmare happened, someone who had stood by me through absolutely everything, helped my mental health more than I can possibly express in words. Samantha also stayed in regular contact with me throughout this rebuilding process. She was completely ostracized by her own family for supporting me and believing in my innocence, but she told me repeatedly that she didn't regret her decision for even a second. "I always knew Jessica was trouble," she would say during our regular phone calls. "I just didn't realize exactly how much trouble she was capable of causing." Samantha finished her degree and moved to Miami last year to start her career fresh. We still talk on the phone at least once a week, and she's become one of my closest friends. It's been 4 years since all the criminal charges were finally dropped, and almost 5 years since that terrible night in the kitchen that destroyed my life. I finally managed to get my college degree last spring, though it took me much longer than it should have due to working full-time and dealing with the financial constraints. I found a decent job in web design that pays $72,000 a year with reasonable health insurance and a 401k matching program. It's not the career trajectory that I had originally planned for myself, but it pays the bills and allows me to slowly build a stable foundation for my future. I'm gradually constructing a new life for myself, one that isn't completely defined by what happened to me during those dark months. Some days are definitely harder than others in terms of dealing with the psychological aftermath. Some mornings I wake up feeling angry about everything that was stolen from me: my education, my career prospects, my relationship, my family trust, and years of my life that I can never get back. Other days, I'm simply grateful to have been cleared of all charges and to have avoided the far worse fate that could easily have been mine. If that security camera footage hadn't existed, or if Robert hadn't installed that camera system, or if he hadn't gone looking through months of stored footage, I would very likely be sitting in a prison cell right now, serving a lengthy sentence for crimes I never committed. My entire future hinged on a piece of technology that could just as easily not have been there. The financial impact of this ordeal continues to affect my life in significant ways. I'm currently $92,000 in student loan debt, which will take me years to pay off. My credit score was completely destroyed during those 10 months when I couldn't make payments on anything due to unemployment and legal expenses. My parents burned through most of their retirement savings to pay for my legal defense. Mark's final legal bill came to $80,500, which was worth every penny for proving my innocence, but it will take my family years to financially recover from this expense. Dating has become incredibly complicated for me now. I'm constantly paranoid about how much personal information to share with new people and when the right time is to tell them about my past. If I tell a new girlfriend too soon about what happened to me, she might see me as damaged goods or wonder if there was actually some truth to the original accusations. But if I wait too long to share this information, it feels like I'm hiding something important about my life and my character. I've had a few short-term relationships over the past couple of years, but nothing serious or long-term has developed. Trust doesn't come easily to me anymore, either in terms of trusting other people or expecting them to trust me. Rebecca and I have maintained our friendship over the years, and we keep in touch regularly. Her brother Daniel went through a similar experience to mine, though thankfully on a much smaller scale and for a shorter period of time. The three of us get together occasionally to talk about our experiences, And there's real comfort in knowing other people who understand what it's like to be falsely accused and have your life turned upside down by someone else's lies. I check public records occasionally to see what Jessica is up to these days, though I'm not sure why I put myself through that emotional torture. She finished her college degree, moved to Miami for work, and got a job in public relations. She posts happy, smiling pictures on her Instagram account like she never tried to systematically destroy someone's life with false accusations. Her probation period ended last year, so she's completely free of any legal consequences now. Sometimes I wonder if she even feels any guilt about what she did to me, or if somehow in her twisted mind, she still believes that she was the wronged party in this situation. The civil lawsuit against the university continues to drag on at an impossibly slow pace. My lawyer explains that they're using a common legal strategy of running out the clock, hoping that I'll eventually get tired of the lengthy process and settle for far less money than I deserve. It's incredibly frustrating to deal with, but I'm absolutely not backing down from this fight. At this point, it's not even really about the money anymore. It's about making them officially acknowledge what they did wrong and holding them accountable for their actions. But the best thing that's happened to me in recent years occurred about 8 months ago when I made the decision to adopt a dog from the local animal shelter. He's a 4-year-old border collie mix named Max, whose previous owner couldn't keep him due to a job relocation that required frequent travel. Max has some trust issues from his past experiences, so we're actually a pretty good match for each other. We've been absolutely inseparable since the day I brought him home. He guards my apartment when I'm at work, goes hiking with me on weekends, and has honestly been the best roommate I've had since Kevin moved back to his home state. If there's one major lesson that I've learned from this entire nightmare experience, it's that you never really truly know people as well as you think you do. The individuals that you expect to stand by you unconditionally through difficult times might be the very first ones to believe the worst possible things about you without question. And sometimes, genuine help and support comes from the most unexpected places, like your girlfriend's cousin who you barely talk to at family gatherings, or a security camera that her father had installed and then completely forgotten about. I honestly don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened to me during those terrible months. The psychological scars run deep, and there are certain aspects of trust and faith in other people that may never completely heal. But I'm doing my absolute best not to let this experience define the rest of my life, or dictate how I approach relationships and opportunities going forward. I've got a decent apartment now that I can actually afford, a job that I don't hate, and that pays me enough to live independently, a loyal dog who never judges me, and a small but solid circle of friends that I know I can trust completely. It's definitely not the life that I had originally planned for myself when I was 19 years old and full of hopes and dreams about the future. It's not the career path I thought I'd be on, it's not the relationship I thought I'd be in, and it's not the financial situation I expected to be dealing with at this stage of my life. But despite all of that, this life is mine. I've built it from nothing after losing absolutely everything, and there's something to be said for knowing that you can survive the worst thing you can imagine and still find a way to move forward. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm struck by how many small details had to align perfectly for the truth to finally come out. If Robert hadn't decided to install that Ring camera due to neighborhood break-ins, I would likely be in prison right now. If he hadn't started having doubts about Jessica's changing story, he never would have thought to check the footage. If the camera angle had been slightly different, it might not have captured the crucial moment when I left unharmed and Jessica followed me to the door looking angry but completely uninjured. If the timestamp hadn't been so precise, matching exactly with when Jessica claimed the assault was happening, it might not have been considered definitive proof of her lies. The entire case hinged on technology that could easily have not existed, and a father's growing suspicion about his own daughter's truthfulness. It's terrifying to think about how close I came to spending years in prison for something I absolutely didn't do, and how many other people might not be as fortunate as I was to have such clear evidence of their innocence eventually surface. I've learned to appreciate the small victories and positive moments in my current life, rather than constantly dwelling on what could have been or what was unfairly taken from me. Max greets me enthusiastically every single day when I come home from work, regardless of what kind of day I've had. My friend Kevin calls me regularly just to check in and see how I'm doing. Samantha sends me funny memes and updates about her life in Miami. My job allows me to be creative and solve interesting problems, even if it's not the exact career I originally envisioned. There are still difficult days when the anger and resentment bubble up unexpectedly. Sometimes I'll see a news story about false accusations, or I'll run into someone from my old life who knew about what happened, and all of those painful emotions come flooding back. I still have trust issues that affect my ability to form close relationships, and I still deal with anxiety about my reputation and how new people in my life will react if they ever find out about my past. But I've also discovered a resilience within myself that I never knew existed before this happened. I've learned that I can survive betrayal by the people closest to me, navigate a complex legal system while maintaining my innocence, rebuild my entire life from scratch in a new place, and find ways to be genuinely happy again despite everything that was stolen from me. The lawsuit against the university will eventually be resolved one way or another, and hopefully, that will provide some additional financial stability and a sense of closure. Jessica will have to live with the knowledge of what she did for the rest of her life, whether she feels genuine remorse about it or not. Lisa will have to reconcile with the fact that she chose to believe the worst about someone she claimed to love, rather than giving them the benefit of the doubt during the most difficult period of their life. As for me, I'm focused on continuing to build the life I have now, rather than mourning the life I lost. Every day that I wake up as a free man, able to make my own choices and pursue my own goals, is a day that I'm grateful for. Not everyone who faces false accusations is as fortunate as I was to have the truth eventually revealed so clearly. I don't take that second chance for granted, and I'm determined to make the most of the opportunity I've been given to start over and create something meaningful from the ashes of what was destroyed. The story of what happened to me serves as a reminder that the justice system, while generally reliable, is not infallible. That people we trust can betray us in unimaginable ways. That technology can sometimes save us when human testimony fails. And that even when everything seems hopeless, there's always a possibility that the truth will eventually surface and provide the vindication that seemed impossible to achieve. I share this story not for sympathy, but as a testament to the fact that it's possible to survive even the worst betrayals and false accusations, rebuild your life from nothing, and find happiness again on the other side of unthinkable adversity.